Salams from the People's Dispatch studios in New Delhi. You're watching Daily Debrief. I'm Siddhant Ani. Our top story today, Iran's Revolutionary Guards Corps has taken responsibility for ballistic missile attacks in the Iraqi northern Kurdish regional capital of Erbil. This is according to reports in Iranian state media. The force released a statement on Sunday saying it targeted the Israeli strategic center in the country. Earlier, Kurdish officials said a dozen ballistic missiles launched from outside Iraq struck the region. The local governor, Omid Khushnaw, told local journalists that it was aimed at the US consulate. However, according to the Kurdish Interior Ministry, the missiles caused only material damage to the new consulate building and injured one civilian. For more on this story, we are joined now by People's Dispatch's Abdul.
On Sunday morning, 12 ballistic missiles were fired in Erbil near US consulate, which is under construction. The Iranians later claimed that these missiles were fired as a retaliation to Israeli attack in Syria last week, in which two of its officers were killed. It also claimed that there is a Israeli presence in Erbil, and this claim is nothing new. Last year also in April, it had claimed that at least 10 of Israeli officials were killed, and 3 of them were confirmed agents of Israeli intelligence agency Mossad. So Iran has been claiming that there is an Israeli presence in Iraq which threatens its security, and it has a long held position that no foreign troops, no foreign agents should be allowed in Iraq, particularly after 2020 assassination of Qasem Soleimani. Iran has a very clear position that no foreign troops or foreign agencies should be allowed to operate, particularly a hostile state called Israel. So you can see this is basically a kind of fallout of what is happening in Syria. Israel has been bombing Syria for a very long time, at least since the beginning of the war there, in which scores of people have died. And most of the time, Israeli claim that this is they are attacking Iranian bases and Iranian affiliated groups like Hezbollah. So what happened in Erbil is basically, you can say, in that should be seen in that particular context. Yeah.
Right. Can you give us a little more sort of broader overview of these various strategic centers and power players in the region, in Iraq at the moment?
As we all know, after the invasion, and particularly after the kind of war situation which happened post the US occupation of Iraq, was virtually divided into 2 major parts. One is the northern part. This is called Kurdistan, which has been given autonomy, which is controlled by mostly the Kurdish forces or Kurdish parties, which are more sympathetic to US forces and US allied in the region. And the rest of the country, of course, in last decade or so, pro-Iranian groups have become more predominant in the rest of the Iraq. And in the last election, which happened in October last year, Muqtada al-Sadr, which was earlier considered to be a close ally to Iran, his party won the majority seats. So you can say virtually today's Iraq is, though Kadhimi is considered to be pro-America, pro-US, by and large, the political division of the country, the rest of the Iraq is considered to be closer to Iranians than the Kurdish controlled regions or the autonomous regions in the northern north. There, since it is considered to be pro-American, the Israelis also are considered to be present there. And so the kind of things which happen in Iran, particularly the attacks on the nuclear facilities or the assassination of nuclear scientists and other things, Iran has claimed that all these things basically originate with the bases operated from that particular region. So this is the broader, you can say, the post-occupation Iraq, is divided in this way, which basically plays a hub for regional politics. Yeah.
Right. Thanks very much for that update, Abdul. And I think we'll have you back on the show in the next day or two to talk at length about what's happening with the Iran nuclear deal. A few days ago, on the 5th of March, a number of conservative British members of parliament, including the Minister for Brexit Opportunities and Government Efficiency, Jacob Rees-Mogg, tweeted a chart claiming that the value of Russian bank assets sanctioned by the UK was higher than those sanctioned by either the US or the European Union. Russia Today has also just now released its own figures based on government sources there. For more on this story, with actual facts that are emerging of the amount of sanctions that have been imposed on Russia, Prabir Purkayastha joins us now. Prabir, what is your reading of the situation, and what do the numbers tell us about how dire the situation is sort of panning out to be?
Well, dire meaning dire for Russia.
Yeah.
You see, the central bank sanctions, and that's what is really much more visible, is, according to Russia, $300 billion out of the $640 billion they had as surplus.
Right.
That was what they had as surplus. Now, that seems to have been frozen. Now, this word frozen, of course, is a misnomer, because if it is my money, I cannot access it. You may call it frozen,
Yeah.
but as far as I'm concerned, you have misappropriated it. And this is the argument that Russia has. This is actually misappropriation or appropriation of Russia's money by the central banks of various countries, which of course European Union, UK and the US are the key. So this is the key issue that is there. So if we look at sanctions, of course there is a larger issue, that sanctions normally are trade, what comes in and goes out of a country. So when you sanction a country, it's equivalent to what was called as economic barricading of a country. And that was what was used, say, during the First World War and the Second World War. But with the Bretton Woods institutions coming into play and the financial structure that has emerged post the Second World War, what has been central to all of this has been the dollar, pegged to the oil, essentially. The oil is always counted in dollars, and this is the basis of moving away even from gold, which is what in Bretton Woods system the US had said the dollar is international currency, but it will peg it to gold, and that is what it will be, a gold-backed currency, which was withdrawn somewhere near 71, or I think this whole thing fell apart, and the US unilaterally said, hey, there is no gold backing it, but it still remains as the dominant international currency. Much more than pound, euro, or the yuan, for instance. And certainly Russia is not a currency, is not recognized as a major international currency. So in this, what happens if you, as a country like India, build up a large surplus for what you would think is a rainy day? Something happens which goes wrong, then I have the surplus stored in bank somewhere, which I can then access. Now it appears that if you are a surplus economy, the so-called surplus that you have is not yours anymore. It belongs to countries in which you are storing the surplus, and they can take it away from you. This calls into question the entire system of global finance. Are we then moving towards globalization, trade, much larger exchanges taking place between countries in goods and services, or should we go back to a situation of economic autarky where we try to maintain self-sufficiency in everything with us and our neighbors, or maybe our trading partners, political partners and so on. So I think this kind of weaponizing the dollar, which is what the US and the European Union and United Kingdom have done, essentially is going to hit global trade and will reduce the scope of global trade and global exchange. We are then going to go back to thinking, well, we need trading blocks which trade with each other and reduce our impact that it may have due to somebody or the other coming against us. So this is one major part we have to see. What the British MP, member of parliament, whatever is put, is well known that Russian oligarchs' wealth to all other money, most of it is in United
Yeah,
Kingdom.
Kingdom.
United Kingdom is the center of global hot money,
Yeah.
which is really what the city of London controls through all the tax havens, which are all linked to the United Kingdom. United Kingdom has the largest number of tax havens in the world, and City of London plays as the financial fulcrum of all of them. So I think that's the other part. But these are bigger questions. What we're really talking about is the sanction regime and weaponizing of the dollar, and this is one example of it. And how does Russia weather it?
So how does Russia weather it, and also, Prabir, what sort of impact will it have on countries like India, for example, or South Africa, who have taken a line that sort of doesn't go completely against Russia on some of these subjects, and they need them for trade and
If you take whatever the resolution that's been passed in the United Nations, in a General Assembly, which doesn't have teeth in it, because the Security Council resolutions have teeth. The question is, the number of countries who have condemned Russia are not the ones who have imposed the sanctions.
Yeah.
Number of countries which have imposed sanctions are really Western Europe, Canada, the United States, and a few of its scam followers in different parts of the world, and the little island called Australia. Okay, so this is really what is the picture. And when you come to sanctions, there is a map circulating in the world which shows which are the countries who are participating in sanctions, who are not. The bulk of Latin America, Africa, Asia are not. Now, this is also can be understood because a lot of them require oil. Already Iran is under sanctions, Venezuela is under sanctions, Libya's oil production has been destroyed. So already 3 countries have been taken out. Iraq, well, there is a war going, as we still know, okay, unstable. And Russia was another major hydrocarbon source. So the only major country which produces oil now is United States, which is not having either sanctions, it imposes sanctions, doesn't have sanctions on it, or is not at war, at least not unless you count the war with itself. So given that, the question is, what does the rest of the world do? Plus, then you have fertilizers, you have wheat. Ukraine and Russia are the largest wheat producers. The phosphate fertilizers, for instance, Belarus and Russia are the major, again, phosphate producers. So you have a whole range of vital stuff which all of us need. And just imagine, if we can't have that, we have a shortage. We can't have either food, or in the case of India, we grow our own food, but we need fertilizers and we need oil. So Iran is under sanction, that was a source. Venezuela is under sanction, that is one of our source. Now Russia is also going to be sanctioned or is under sanctions. So where do we get these things from? And if we don't, then of course we have a huge crisis, apart from already the uptick in the price of oil, which is expected to go up to $150 to $200 maybe in the next 6-8 months.
Right.
So that's the reason India has been now talking about what it had earlier also discussed, how to get oil and gas from Iran in spite of US sanctions. The same issue comes up now with Russia as well. And how it can do it, yes, we know how to do it. China has also shown the same thing. You essentially have a rupee-ruble agreement.
Right.
And that's what then you use for the transfers back and forth. You need to balance your trade so that whatever you buy, you're able to sell goods of equivalent amount, at least set in the ruble-rupee exchange. But with the falling rate of ruble, how do you balance the ruble-rupee rate, which is stable and which makes sense to both, is something that they have to work out. But this is the way that countries are going to now deal with it, because they're not going to impose sanctions, and they will work this relationship with themselves outside the dollar economy. So long term, weaponizing the dollar may have consequences. That dollar as an international currency will tend to be less important because people have to work their ways out of this.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Prabir. And we'll have you back later in the week to also talk about the Iran nuclear deal and the implications that that will have on the entire energy scenario for the world, actually. Thanks so much. Moving on to our last story, which is from the Cricket World Cup. And finally, the Women's Cricket World Cup is ongoing in New Zealand. Defending champions England have faced 3 back-to-back defeats, and Pakistan have notched up 4 defeats on the trot, including last night's very close 9-run defeat at the hands of regional rivals Bangladesh. For the latest from the tournament, Leslie Xavier, NewsClick Sports editor, joins us now. Leslie, India getting set to send defending champions England back home early from the tournament. Next up, the two face each other. England have, like we were saying earlier, lost 3 in a row already.
Yeah, it's surprising how the English team have performed in this World Cup. They have lost 3 and they're clearly struggling with the team combinations and as well as individual form is concerned. So surprising also in the sense that the English women had decent exposure, decent number of matches under their belt coming into the tournament compared to say for instance India that way. So. But otherwise, the World Cup so far has gone according to form. That way, Australia well and truly on top of their game, as expected. South Africa is doing great. South Africa, again, one would have expected them to reach the knockouts, but this World Cup, the first 3 matches, they have won all the matches and they have come out. I mean, they've stepped up their game, so to speak. They're gelling well and probably peaking at the right time. India is third. They have played 3, won 2, lost 1, and against England again. So India can't afford to take their foot off against
Take
England
it easy,
because English have their backs to the wall and they would like to win all the next 3 matches and probably have a stake at the knockouts race because mathematically they're still in it, but by a wee bit of a margin. So it's going to be an interesting match because a must-win game playing against a side who is in decent form, but again, it can go either way. So one can't say that India has a easy outing against England because on paper, English are a strong team. Otherwise, second half of the draw, West Indies, Bangladesh and Pakistan, they have all been under iffy form, struggling. Host New Zealand have played well, but they're currently at 4th, but they have played an extra game. They are in line, but to qualify, but they have to win the next 2 matches. Clear answer.
Right. Is it looking like those are the 4 teams then that will proceed to the knockout stage?
Most likely, unless if England has a huge second half of the group stage where they win by huge margins and then probably have that net run rate factor coming into the mix.
And if other results, I suppose, go their way as well.
So ifs and buts are there, but otherwise, going by the current form of the teams so far and the standings, these 4 are the teams that are likely to make it to the semi-finals.
Yeah, Bangladesh pulling off a exciting 9-run, very close run win over Pakistan recently. You were doing some research along the sidelines though, and you dug up some pretty interesting stuff for us.
It's when the Women's World Cup happens, the immediate question is that how much of a attention or support the women's game get from the governing bodies globally. So let's just be very clear that the ICC has, in the last 7-8 years, have been trying to push the game. Say, for instance, when the World Cup happened in India, the T20 World Cup that happened in India in 2016, there was a clear mandate for journalists that there was a early match which was a women's game and then the late match which was a men's game, and you can't enter the stadium just for the men's game. You have to be there for the women's game. Of course, they couldn't dictate whether the journalists who were in covered the women's game as well. 80% of them did not. So that is the approach, and we are talking about real stakeholders in the game of cricket. These people follow the game and they understand the game and they cover the game for their respective publications across the world. And still there is that disparity. And on ground, I mean, the biggest disparity is in India, right? We have the richest tournament in the world, the Indian Premier League, and BCCI is still reluctant to bring out a women's version of that tournament. While the success of the women's version has been proven globally in countries like England as well as Big Bash League in Australia. So it's not like the women's game don't have spectators or takers. It just need to be pushed the right way, bring in all the quality players in and market it the right way. So in the World Cup, an interesting fact came up. When India played Pakistan, there were viral images doing the round of Misbah Maroof, the Pakistan player, and a baby. So that was, I mean, it was a perfect PR exercise for the ICC. But then looking at that, the feel-good factor notwithstanding, if you look at it, if you dig up some numbers as to how many mothers actually play the game at the highest level, or forget the number of mothers in the mix. How many married women is accorded the privilege to play at the highest level? Then the numbers are actually quite damning. So, for instance, 8 mothers are there in this World Cup tournament. 8 teams, 8 mothers, and compare that to the men's game. That 8 would be there in one roster, one team roster itself. 8 fathers would be there in one roster itself. So if you look at the narratives of women players who have fallen down the wayside just because they decided to get married or become a mother, it's huge in the past years. So things have changed, which is good. Like, for instance, now Amy Straithwaite, New Zealand, from New Zealand. She is the current vice captain of New Zealand. She has a young baby. She is the first woman cricketer to avail of the maternity leave policy that ICC instituted across the countries, and New Zealand was the first country to institute that, and specifically for Amy.
Right.
And Leah Tahuhu is her partner. She also is a cricketer. So they decided to have the baby, and then they planned it, and they availed of a 1-year maternity leave, and then the fight happens to come back to the top of the game. And for women, it's not easy. I'm not saying that physiologically it's an easy challenge for them to get back to the prime, but across the sporting world, we have seen mothers win Olympic medals, right? So why not cricket provide the women that kind of a platform to reach? To get back into the game, because these are their careers, and the same applies to marriage. And it's quite an irony that if the players are left to choose between getting married and having a personal life of their own by choice, or play the game. It's either this or that. And the numbers again are very damning, because if you look at just South Asia, for instance, India, 19 centrally contracted players are there, women players. Out of it, none of them are married. Pakistan, 1 out of 20. Bangladesh, 2 out of 22. Sri Lanka, 0 out of 20. So no country for married women. That's the state of affairs here. So,
given the social and cultural context in which marriage happens in this part of the world, this assumes, a great deal more significance.
Added significance.
All right. Thanks so much, Leslie. That's all the time we have today. We'll catch you again later in the week. That's all we have on this episode of Daily Debrief. For more on all of these stories, you can head on over to our website, peoplesdispatch.org, and do give us a follow on all the regular social media platforms for updates. We'll be back again, same time, same place tomorrow. Until then, stay safe. Goodbye.